I see psychedelics, though, as very inspirational. I would like a lot of artists and philosophers and others to be able to use it more rather than less. My own personal journey has certainly been one involving psychedelics, and many of my philosophical ideas have come on the psychedelic trips. People who use it on a reasonably regular basis in a very controlled environment often return to this idea that it has helped them to approach religion and spirituality. They've had many mystical experiences, and even if psychedelics at worst is a shortcut to the proper spiritual experience, at least it works for a lot of people, undeniably does so. You can't even imagine the last 150 years of philosophy without thinking that a lot of these philosophers took quite a lot of psychedelics to think the way they did. As a philosopher, I'm coming to the point maybe I should actually write more about psychedelics rather than less.
Hi everyone, welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. Now I have with me Alexander Bard. He's a philosopher from Stockholm. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Susan, for having me.
Is it okay to call you Alex? Or would
you can call me Alex.
Alex.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for being here. And for the purpose of context in this conversation, please tell us your background a little bit for our listeners, if that's okay.
I'm a philosopher. I used to be in the music industry for many years, so a lot of people know me from the music industry too. I was a songwriter and record producer, but I've been writing books and concentrated on the philosophy part of my life for the past 25 years. So I just published my 6th book together with John Söderqvist, who's my co-writer. And we write a social philosophy, and we're specializing on the relationship between human beings and technology.
Amazing, and I have the privilege to have some of your books, which is a great sort of reference points for me in this current moment, the work that I do as well. And I'd like to talk about the intersection of psychedelics and philosophy and psychedelics and maybe technology as well.
Yeah.
What are your observations? Because you've been in the conference, you've attended the whole from Wednesday. Since Wednesday, you've attended every day?
I'm at the age where actually it's my mentorships that are giving the speeches of the conference, which makes me very proud. So, but I also know the other philosophers who are here. For example, Eric Davis is an old friend of mine, Thomas Metzinger and Susan Blackmore, and Peter Sjöstedt Hughes is legendary in these circles. Also because they have written more about psychedelics than I have. I've only mentioned psychedelics in my work with Söderqvist, briefly now and then. I see psychedelics, though, as very inspirational. I would like a lot of artists and philosophers and others to be able to use it more rather than less. So for me, my own personal journey has certainly been one involving psychedelics. And many of my philosophical ideas have come on the psychedelic trips in the middle of psychedelic experiences. So I'm really interested in the topic, but I'm here as a participant this year at the conference, not as a speaker, because as a philosopher, I'm coming to the point maybe I should actually write more about psychedelics rather than less. But there are so many other philosophers who have done profound, great work on the topic already. And like Peter Sjöstedt Hughes has pointed out, you can't even imagine the last 150 years of philosophy without thinking that a lot of these philosophers took quite a lot of psychedelics to think the way they did.
This is a very strong concept.
Yeah, but Nietzsche and Freud were very open-minded in the 19th century about doing drugs and then thinking.
Do you think do you think it's what made them who they are?
I think so, yeah. I think psychedelics has a profound influence on people, and the people who use it on a reasonably regular basis in a very controlled environment often return to this idea that it has helped them to approach religion and spirituality. They've had many mystical experiences. And even if psychedelics at worst is a shortcut to the proper spiritual experience, at least it works for a lot of people, undeniably does so. And I'm also interested, of course, therefore, I work as a psychoanalyst, I work with psychiatrists and a team in Stockholm, and I'm interested in, for example, the medical uses of psychedelics, which could be wonderful.
Yeah, this is amazing. So coming from a therapy background, of course, I am very much heavily in conversation with so many people around the medical side of it, and the research and the science and the therapeutic use of psychedelics. So for me, it's a real honor to have you as a philosopher sitting and sort of talking about psychedelics from a very different perspective, because our listeners are usually hearing a lot of the therapeutic aspects, the healing, sometimes spiritual, because we do have guests that are shamans or coming from a shamanic perspective or an indigenous perspective, so they kind of bring a spiritual aspect. But mainly, I rarely have a philosopher who can talk about psychedelics. And when you said Freud and, you know, exactly, very open. I watched his last, do you know the last session of Freud documentary?
About it. He visited America, right? Was that the documentary you're talking about?
I think it's a conversation between Professor Lewis. Gosh, I'm not good remembering names, but he's a UK-based professor who was leaning towards Christianity. And I think he wrote something that challenged or confronted Freud. So there was an invitation between the two to have this conversation. And the entire documentary, it's not here in Europe yet, but I've just been to Arizona last week and I saw on flight. So it became my entire flight documentary, psychoanalytic exploration. And I found it very fascinating because the entire documentary was between these two gentlemen having a dialogue. And I sensed that there are some psychedelic conversations, indirect conversations.
Oh, Freud wrote about it. But he also wrote critically about what's called the oceanic feeling that we know can have very healing effects, for example, in psychedelics. It's a very common experience. But Freud was also keen to criticize that the oceanic feeling could be used, for example, to a road towards addictions and things like that, which is true, which is absolutely true. It's very good to read Freud and his own experiences and his writings on these things. But I would say that I work with psychologists and psychiatrists, but I always emphasize that if you think of it like a stream, then psychology is upstream. For example, if you do have any problems, mental health problems, you go to see psychologists first. And a psychologist can then remit you on to a psychiatrist. So then psychiatry comes downstream from psychology. But further downstream from psychiatry comes psychoanalysis. So people mistakenly think psychoanalysis and psychology are the two closest ones. No, they're not really. Because in psychoanalysis, you expect people to be quite healthy before they go through the process of psychoanalysis. Because in psychoanalysis, you're confronted with the big existential questions. So you should deal with your mental health problems first and be mentally stable and grounded, and then you can confront the existential questions. So I work in a team in Stockholm that people come to me to do psychoanalysis, which is essentially taking philosophy all the way down to a single human being and the single human subjective experience of reality. So it's philosophy applied on a single human person. That's what psychoanalysis is. And it's wonderful to work together in teams this way, because then we can just say, well, this is really more on the psychology side of things. It's upstream. You need to deal with this first. Then you can do the psychiatric evaluation, if that's part of it. For example, maybe in microdosing psychedelic substances, or maybe microdosing psychiatric medications if that's needed. And then you can go into psychoanalysis. So I think the three match each other wonderfully. And of the three, both psychology and psychiatry are sciences. Psychology is a social science. Psychiatry is a medical science. Psychoanalysis is not a science. That's where Freud failed, famously. Psychoanalysis is an art form. It's an artistic exercise. So once you go into the interstice between psychoanalysis and psychedelics, it gets interesting because we're dealing with healthy people who, for example, are interested in the inspirational quality of a recreational use of a psychedelic. And then you talk about artists. You talk about people with, different types of personalities who are creative in their expressions. Designers and other people will be interested. And that's also a part of something. It's not the part of this conference here in Holland, but it's also a very interesting aspect of psychedelic culture.
Yeah. Wow. This is very powerful stuff.
And therapy is, of course, all over the place here. Because therapy can involve all of them. I mean, the good therapist has a knowledge of psychiatry, of psychology, and hopefully of psychoanalysis too. Therapy can always learn from all these three different fields. They should be complementary to each other.
Yeah. And there is a lot of resentment or maybe like a negative association with Freud and the psychoanalysis. Would you say that in general?
Yeah, I think Freud failed in trying to turn psychoanalysis into science. That's a common failure, I would say, because psychoanalysis was developed as an art form, and the person really reformed psychoanalysis after Freud and did fantastic work was Jacques Lacan in France. And many of today's greatest philosophers like Slavoj Žižek, Julia Kristeva, Alain Badiou, they were all students of Lacan. So I think Lacan, in hindsight, has to really be viewed as one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. But Lacan was adamant that he was a psychiatrist by training, and his science was psychiatry. But the philosophy and the psychoanalysis did was artistic. And I think that's a good division. So we can get rid of this whole thing that Freud wasn't good for the human psyche, whatever. Of course he was. But Freud's attempt at creating psychology failed. And who at least met, I think, in America was William James. And I would credit William James for being the philosopher who invented psychology and the science of psychology. So that was William James actually did that, not Freud. Freud invented an art form called psychoanalysis. William James invented the science we today proudly call psychology.
Thank you for sharing this. This is a very important conversation to be having. So watching the documentary actually helped me understand a very different side of Freud. Mm-hmm. And I think probably there's going to be a lot of critics once it's out there and everybody's watches it. But what I picked up, this art form that you talk about, which was I have a newfound respect, just to say. It really moved me, actually. And I had to take it back a few times to go through he would say a very specific, and Anthony Hopkins did a great job playing Freud. I mean, he was great. He just kind of expressed him really well.
Well, the thing with the 20th century is that philosophers got stuck with analytic philosophy at big academic institutions that were doing logic and things like that. And almost all of it is wasted.
Right.
Nobody's doing any of that anymore in the 21st century. We're rather rewriting the history of the 20th century and have discovered that psychoanalysis and anthropology were the two major philosophical revolutions in the 20th century. And women started contributing to the world of philosophy. Finally, the female voice was heard, especially through anthropology. The world has been full of fantastic female anthropologists. Even Camille Paglia today is really an anthropologist. She's an art theorist and all that, but she's a philosopher. We have to regard, I would even say that anthropology is maybe what women do when men try to do philosophy, because they're so closely related now. Right. But the study of human beings and of human society in an anthropological sense is almost like an art form as well. So this is where we take our inspiration from today. We do philosophy. We do use psychoanalysis a lot, and we use a lot of anthropology.
So I'm hearing maybe in my perception, bringing psychedelics into psychoanalysis could be a very potent.
Are you kidding? It is in so many ways. Carefully done, of course, but yes.
What would be the pitfalls if not carefully done?
Well, I'll tell you one thing you work with in psychoanalysis is that people get stuck in repetitive loops. Especially
if... Sounds like psychedelics.
Well, you can get stuck in repetitive loops of psychedelics.
Some of the experiences, right?
Yes.
People are continually having the same experiences.
Yes. And bad trips are very often very cyclical.
Repetitive,
yeah. That's true. But if I have an analysand, as I say, I don't say patient because it's a radically equal relationship. The analyst and the analysand have an equal relationship. They're equals. It's just that the analysand is the topic of the conversation. So the topic of the work is the analysand and the inner life of the analysand. That's what psychoanalysis does. So if I got an analysand, I'm the analyst. And this analysand tends to get stuck in repetitive loops and can't get out of them. It's probably because there's a trauma we're dealing with here. Because the way the human psyche deals with trauma is by never go directly onto the trauma because it's too hurtful. And therefore, instead, people go in repetitive loops around the trauma. Now, to break through to the trauma in a careful, loving way, to be able to expose the trauma and get the drama out of the trauma, so the trauma can be, shrunk to its proper size in the psyche, and people can move on.
Could that be done with psychedelics?
That can definitely.
So that's where psychedelics come in,
yeah,
right?
Psychedelics comes in.
And then the role of the analyst?
The analyst is then to lead that process, yeah.
So you're saying the mediator, he or she will be the mediator between the medicine and the...
Exactly. So it's like shamanic work. It's exactly the same thing. And not only with psychedelics, I would say that MDMA and ketamine have really promising properties when it comes to this type of treatment. So this is just an example. Another example is somebody who comes into the therapeutic setting. In my case, analysis with you would be a therapeutic setting. And they come in through the door and they're not used to speaking their minds. They find it hard to find words. Well, there's certain psychedelics that can open up people to be more vocal.
Right.
And to dare to talk about themselves and take the space required to listen to them and try to understand where they're located and try to find the problems they try to get around and help them with that process.
Right.
So that can be very useful.
Totally.
That's just two concrete examples.
Totally makes sense. I want to come back to the mediator, the psychoanalyst, because I am very drawn to the psychoanalysis because of the art form, the concept of art form really attractive to me, and it's quite. It makes sense because with psychology and psychiatry, we have a lot of limitations in terms of harm reduction and efficacy, and all of that can give us. It kind of narrows a lot of the things that we could do. But if we can look at this work as an art form exploration, it changes the landscape. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely.
So in that case, the reason I want to bring it back to the mediator. So the mediator is a big deal in the freeway because let's say they haven't done their work before. Do you meet psychoanalysts that they haven't touched their own work?
Well, you can't I'm a Lacanian school psychoanalyst. You can't be a psychoanalyst without having done the psychoanalysis first yourself. So you go through the entire process of being analyzed until sort of the lies of your life have been exposed. That's what psychoanalysis does. It's basically, okay, so this was a lie, and this was a lie, this lie, I can drop them, they can no longer hurt me. I let go of the lies and suddenly live a much more truthful life. That's what you're looking for in psychoanalysis.
Sure.
And it's kind of underwhelming, funnily enough, to go through that process because a lot of rugs are being torn beneath you because, oh, that was another fantasy or something else I took for granted that I shouldn't take for granted. And there's very little left. And the experience after psychoanalysis coming out of it is very much one of, oh, is that all there is to it? And the analyst goes, yep, welcome to life. And that's where freedom starts. That's where freedom to express yourself starts, because then you realize that you have a much larger space for expressing yourself freely and getting engaged in relations, not being hurt by being turned down and things like that. And that's, I think, is the big gain of doing a psychoanalysis. And it's similar to psychedelic experiences precisely in that sense, because the psychedelic experience, properly mediated and integrated, integration is everything, integrated, can do the same trick and often in a shorter time span. And it can also push itself through acute states where just talking about it will last forever. I mean, if I could tell somebody that instead of doing 14 or 15 likely sessions of this and not being guaranteed the outcome, we could probably get to that through psychedelic experience, and then 2 sessions later, we're done with the integration. And we moved ahead and we won a year of your life doing it. Now, if that is possible, then certainly the combination of psychoanalysis and psychedelics gets very attractive.
Because I'm very interested in the mediator position, that we can maybe develop, pioneer some of that. Because one of the misconceptions in psychedelic space is that psychedelics can do that for you.
Yes.
People believe that they can do solo journeys at home in their own ways. And
No. I know a few artists who can go out in the wilderness and take a drug, and they're fine and they get inspiration because they know how to do it, they know what they're looking for. So they can go into that realm and sort of, it's like they go down in the ore and they go down in the mine and they pick the ore, and they can pick the ore out and then turn the ore into metal when they're sober the next day. Artists can look for it that way. That I understand completely.
Is that because they're wired in that way?
They're wired in that way, and they
have
experience that.
And capacity for...
My recommendation is to never start doing psychedelics on your own unless you're very experienced and have a very, very clear purpose why you're doing it on your own. This should be done socially. I highly recommend it socially. And I always, to most people, I say, if you have sex with the opposite sex, most people are heterosexuals after all, then it's a good choice to maybe do the psychedelic experience with people of your own sex. So you enjoy the intimacy of other people of your own sex through psychedelics, and you enjoy the intimacy of the opposite sex through your sexuality. So that's a good combo to start with. That I think is a very solid recommendation, seems to work for people. But I would say, the mediator function in psychoanalysis, it's interesting because there's a transference problem. People,
Yes,
the analysts
precisely.
aren't projecting onto you as an analyst or a therapist. They're projecting onto that you must know everything, because suddenly all these doors are open to them that never had open before. And suddenly they see the traumas they've been suffering from very clearly. And they're almost bored with things that they've been doing repetitively, so they can let go of them. And they transfer onto you this enormous power, this capacity to see through things. And in psychoanalysis, you actually, it sounds nasty, but you play with it. You stay with the transference on purpose to get even more out of the analyst until one day you just behave like a human being in front of them, and they get so angry with you and they get so disappointed because you break the trust.
And that's the magic.
That's
where
the magic.
the magic happens.
It's
That's
very
where
tough. It's very tough.
It's the cracking open moment
Yep.
where everything kind of starts to dismantle and dissolve.
Exactly. And this is why you must have done your own ego and shadow work. You must have done your own psychoanalytic journey before you become an analyst. Absolutely. Because you're going to go to that position and you're not going to enjoy that at all. You're going to hate the fact that you're this subject onto which they're transferring this enormous power and knowledge. And then you know exactly when to break it. And they get so angry with you. They get so frustrated with you. And then you just look at them and say, listen, I'm just human, just like you. This is the whole point of the journey. The whole point of the journey is that the whole process is your own process. I'm just like a cold wall against which you're throwing all these things, and they come back to you, and you're now dealing with them yourself.
Okay, so that means you're fully aware of what is happening in the psychedelic trip sitting, guiding. You're fully aware of what's happening, right? Because the guides, the therapists, and facilitators are not willing to go there.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of rescuing, wrapping it under cover. There is a lot of this delusion.
I'll give an example. The first thing you learn when you facilitate an ayahuasca ceremony, and I love doing that kind of work. It's really, really inspiring. Ayahuasca is also incredibly potent against depression, has many health benefits, but it's a very intense experience. And the one thing to do when people start screaming or whatever and start doing the drama in the middle of the trip and they're onto something, whatever, is to not interfere with it and sit there and suddenly go and babysit them and touch them. It's just to leave them alone. What you do is that you change their bucket. So they just puked in the bucket. You just change the bucket, take another bucket. So you're busy going to the toilet, emptying a bucket full of puke and cleaning it out and everything. And you allow them to stay in their process because you remind them and remind yourself, integration is tomorrow. And when they come up and you sit there and you realize they're trying to integrate the experience in the middle of the experience, all you do is come up to them and you say, darling, we're doing the integration tomorrow, remember? Stay in the now. Stay in the ceremony right now. And then you leave them. And because you just say that and then leave them, that means you really mean it. Because if you would sit down and talk to them, you would force them into integration in the middle of the ceremony, which is totally guilty.
They are still in the process of it.
Totally.
You cannot do integration.
No. Leave them to it. And this is why, in my work, and I've borrowed this from psychedelics onto psychoanalysis in my work, is that the intention and the ceremony in the integration must be kept separate, preferably with days in between. But the intention is very important. Why are you here? And why are you doing this? And why you're doing it with these people? And what do you expect to come out of it? And put the expectations to the forefront. And that's the intention. And when the intention is clear, now you're ready. Then you go into the ceremony. But the ceremony is not when things happen. That's just when everything's breaking up and doors are open.
Absolutely.
The integration, the therapeutic session afterwards is gold. Yeah. And you can let them do this with each other. It's really funny. We all know about the talking stick and sitting over the talk. That was invented quite recently. It's a modern innovation. It started with shamans in Peru who didn't speak English and had people coming from America and Europe. And they hardly spoke Spanish. They speak Quechua if you're in Peru. So they realized that, well, we can't talk. You can't talk to the shaman the next day, the therapist or the analyst, as you're supposed to do. So if you can't talk to the shaman the next day to integrate, they just said, well, the second best option we have is to give them a talking stick so they can talk to each other. And 3 or 4 ceremonies into a cycle, drinking ayahuasca, they'd be so vulnerable to each other and so open to each other, they will start taking care of each other in the group.
Wow.
And that
as humans do.
As humans do.
Organically and naturally.
And you do whatever you can with the integration. You take the best possible option you have. If you don't have a professional counselor there, another human being will do.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want to bring your attention back to the mediator function again.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm going over it again and again because this is really close to my heart and this is really important. would you say because they haven't done their work? So if somebody hasn't done their work and they're facilitating, can that be very dangerous?
Absolutely.
So
you have to take about a professional
how do we deal with that, Alex? How do we deal with, because right now around the world as we speak, so many facilitators are facilitating psychedelic sessions and who haven't touched their own work. Because people think doing your work means you sit in 100 sessions. And there is this phenomenon that talk about shadow work. They talk about, you look at your shadow, you do your shadow work, or unconscious processing, projections and whatever. But there's many, many layers to that.
Yes.
So
sometimes you become a trauma addict, as I call it. It's like you try to invent traumas you never had just to be more interesting so you could take more trips. And then the problem is you become a kick seeker rather than doing serious spiritual work, which is another trap you could end up in as well.
Yeah, and since the facilitator, if they are in it for the money, of course they don't want to lose a customer, they don't want to lose a client, so then they're okay having them back all the time.
Well, this is the problem with psychology as well, because psychology in itself is basically we fix you to send you back into a society where you play specific roles. You can go to work again and make money again and be responsible for your marriage or whatever you're supposed to do. So basically we fix you to put you back into society you never criticize. What we can do in psychoanalysis is that we open the doors to all forms of criticism, meaning you can criticize the society you live in itself. You can ask yourself the question of what kind of society do I live in and get angry about it if you want to. And you can also put yourself into that realm all of a sudden. So psychoanalysis, you can go more existential with those questions. So it's hard to perform. It cannot be done by charlatans. It's really, really hard. I would give some advice for the mediator position. I would give is, number one, first of all, in the intention, be very clear about the relationship between you and the other person. Are you friends, or is this a professional relationship? And if it's a professional relationship, are you paid to mediate to that person or not? Because, for example, in therapy, you get paid as a therapist. But if you go to a confession booth in a church, you don't pay anything because the congregation pays for the confession booth to be there for everybody at any time. Now, people react very differently to things if they talk to a friend or if they talk to a professional. They react very differently regarding whether they paid beforehand or haven't paid, so they're in some kind of a sacred mode within a community to have an experience. And I think these things need to be sorted out during the intention. So the intention is very much about the relationship between the mediator and the patient in this case, for example, or wherever you're trip sitting or whatever you're doing. But I think you need to be very clear about the relationship between people before you go into these things. And that helps a lot usually to set it up.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, Alex. I know we're coming to the end of our conversation, but I think we need to have you back very soon to continue.
I love this conversation, Susan. I love to continue. I'm learning from it as well. So I would love to have these conversations. I think a lot, like you, I'm doing spiritual work, and I discovered 10 years ago that I had to isolate men from women, and then I started working with women who isolate women from men because of spiritual work. You just separate the two sexes. That's what you do in almost all spiritual traditions, to let the men be to the men, with other men, and women with women. And I'm really interested in starting making comparative studies after these 10 years, which I'm doing with women who do women's work. And it's fascinating how differently men and women react and how different their spiritual needs are. That fascinates me enormously.
I mean, that's probably how,
I think
again,
that's a future conversation for us,
right?
definitely.
And probably why we connected again, because of like similar, projects that I was...
The dark feminine, the dark masculine, father wounds and mother wounds. Father wounds and mother wounds are totally different when it comes to men and women. And the one thing I've learned the hard way through psychoanalysis is that the hardest thing for me to treat and work with is a mother wound in a man. It's the toughest one of them all. It can take up to 30 years. It's like bad news when you get it, but you got to go through it. And it's doable. It's doable. It is doable.
Light.
It's absolutely doable. As long as you're alive, everything is doable. And anything that happened to you in your life is material that you can use for art or anything else in your life. Anything that happened to you is material.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So definitely having you back. So we'll be in touch. And so just for the for this conversation, please tell us, where can they find you, our listeners, if they're interested in what you're saying. Where can they find you, connect with you?
Okay, I try to be as accessible as I can. You can usually find me on Facebook and drop a little message there. So because this is a very intimate conversation between friends and everybody involved in this conversation are therapists, etc., you can find me at bardissimo@gmail.com. Simple email address, bardissimo. Bardissimo. It's a joke. The great bard in Italian. Bardissimo@gmail.com works. You can send me an email. I'm available on Facebook. You can find my work at syntheism.org. Syntheism.org. My work with Söderqvist and Arbo can be found there as well, if you're interested. And I run an international forum for artists and philosophers, including a lot of therapists too, dealing a lot with psychedelics, called the Intellectual Deep Web. And for people out there interested in being a member of the mailing list and participate in those discussions, it's a participatory network in North America and Europe called the Intellectual Deep Web. You're all welcome to join. That goes for everybody involved in Susan's fantastic show.
Thank you so much. This has been very helpful and valuable, Alex. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. If you want more of these conversations, drop a comment and request Alex to be back. I'm sure he would love to be part of our community.
Absolutely.
Because we're opening up to this spiritual world, especially it's inevitable with psychedelic work.
It's even my next book.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Psychedelic Conversations podcast is designed to educate, inform, and expand awareness. For more information, please head over to psychedelicconversations.com. You can also share with your friends or leave a review so that we can reach more people. You can also join us in our private Facebook group to keep the conversation going. This show is for information purposes only, and it is not intended to provide mental health or medical advice. Thanks for listening.